Thank you very much for having me. I have the pleasure of being last today, but hopefully not least. And I'm proud to say that I made it through the whole day. I just arrived from Canada a few days ago, and I'm extremely tired, but managed to get a presentation on this morning starting at 4 o'clock. So, a little bit of background on myself. I'm a lawyer. I'm managing a counter-trafficking program in East Timor, or Timor-Leste. I will give you a little bit of background on IOM itself. I'm sure everybody has heard the name before. It's an international organization that works on migration issues all over the planet. Our mandate is broader than UNHCR's mandate. We're not strictly limited to refugees. We work with everybody in natural disaster situations and run IDP camps all over the place, and of course work on trafficking of persons issues. So today, I'm going to run through some of our regional initiatives, and that will be a relatively quick part because it is not my area of expertise strictly, but I will give you an overview, and then I would be glad to take requests for further information and put you directly in contact with actual project managers of the mentioned projects. Then I'm going to go over some considerations for the regional policies, and then talk about the Timor-Leste perspective. So, one of our regional projects, which covers Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, and Thailand, is called PROMISE. That's the Poverty Reduction Through Safe Migration, Skills Development, and Enhanced Job Placement. It's a multi-year fund from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, and right now it's still in inception phase, so they're still seeking to establish what the full program is going to look like. That said, there are already some preliminary findings. What they've found so far is that skills development systems in these countries are not responsive to the labor market demands. We know that high-skilled labor seems to be the highest thing in demand in the ASEAN region, and in particular in these countries. Skills development providers do not attract lower-skilled migrant workers into their systems, and that is for a variety of reasons, including accessibility, cost understanding, and perceived usefulness. And of course, we know that the majority of migrants would be low-skilled workers, so this is a sizable portion that is missing. The project will therefore aim in the long run to support skills providers and ensure training is responsive to migrants and their employers, in particular with a focus on gender, and will ensure more skills development programs include migrant workers, improving pathways to better employment, reducing risk, and again with a focus on gender. Another regional program, actually this one is global, but in action here regionally, is called IRIS, or the International Recruitment Integrity System. This works to reduce illicit recruitment, which reduces the risk to migrants in general. It's a voluntary international ethical recruitment framework, and it provides a platform to address unfair recruitment practices. It's a public-private alliance between public sector, private sector, and IOM as an intermediary, and it will develop a voluntary accreditation system for companies to show that they are bona fide recruiters and are not just grabbing people and treating them badly. This is some background further on it about the accreditation process. It's going to be based on adherence to common principles, and those include no fee charging to job seekers, no retention of workers' passports or identity documents, given the risk that that creates to migrants, and a requirement for transparency in the labor supply chain. Job seekers will have better information regarding ethical recruitment, and IRIS will administer a complaints and referral mechanism for criminal proceedings and civil proceedings if necessary. Another large-scale research project that I haven't heard mentioned today is quite pertinent. Now, I'm not an expert on this research project, and I just went through it. It's about 138 pages, and it has some very important findings. It was actually drafted and researched before the beginning of this year, but it was released in around January of this year, right around the time that the AEC came into effect. So this was done by a professor in the UK. I think his name is Martin Roos, and he is an expert in the field. He did desk reviews and sent out surveys to key ASEAN officials regarding labor migration. One of the keynotes, and findings from his research is that the AEC system is not going to be designed, or is not designed, to fully facilitate labor movement. It's rather to facilitate the recognition of credentials, which may then facilitate movement for highly skilled professionals. But it's not really about labor mobility, it's more about credential recognition. And I would note that risk factors for these highly skilled professionals are obviously much lower given education and likely access to funds and information than lower skilled laborers. So what is missing is the elephant in the room being those low skilled laborers, which make up the vast majority of ASEAN labor migrants. We know that there are high numbers of unskilled and educated migrants, and there are very high incentives to get out for them to migrate. Numerous issues, limited domestic earning potential, inter alia. We know that formal channels can be costly for migration. They take time, they have opportunity costs, i.e. lost job potential or opportunities in the meantime while following the formal channels, and sometimes they can cost money. While irregular may be high risk, it can work. So when we look at lower skilled laborers, they are not dealt with in the AEC system, and I'm sure that that was intentional since it's the first step, but it's something that will definitely have to be looked at down the line since they are the majority of migrants in the region and also at the biggest risk. Now, as I said, if you have any questions about these regional programs, please forward them to me and get in contact with me, and I will put you directly in contact with the project managers who can give you an infinite amount of information, much more than I can. So a brief overview of IOM's work in the region related to trafficking in persons, which is my area of specialty with IOM, follows the 3 Ps, or 4 Ps, sorry. We have protection services, we have a focus on prevention, prosecution, and policy and partnership. And I don't think I'm going to go through all of them, but we work all over the place in these areas with different projects in different countries. And right now there is hopefully going to be a large USAID-funded regional project for which IOM will be vying. But I know your presentation was quite interesting, and I will be looking to talk with you afterward. And I'm sure you already know my IOM Indonesian colleagues, so we'll touch base after this. Some overall considerations for labor mobility. It's about getting it right. It's just like turning on the shower in the morning. You don't turn it all the way to hot and then all the way to cold. You'll burn yourself and you'll freeze yourself. You need to go slowly and find just the right level in between. Interstate and state-supported and regional mechanisms are by far the most secure, and they can be safer. And they can work to harness and support economic development and growth far more than informal migration can, and private sector all by itself. But if there are significant transaction costs in those systems, people will not use them. People are intelligent and logical, and they follow their own best interests. So if you see that applying for a visa will take you a year and cost you $1,000, and you probably may not get it at the end, then why would you do it? You would look for other means and other alternatives. And that is exactly what we see happening in other countries. I believe IOM Cambodia just did a study that costed it out in terms of time and money, and it was somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,000 to $2,000 in 9 months of time to get into Thailand legally for work purposes. Irregular migrants who do not follow the formal system are, of course, vulnerable and lack that state protection to back them up. They are at risk of trafficking in persons. They may be paying human smugglers to get them across the border, therefore funding organized crime. God knows where that money ends up, whether it's in Afghanistan or in other bad places, who knows. And it really limits the contribution to national economies back home. There's no way for a government back home where a migrant has come from to harness those remittances if they don't even know that they exist. So, here's a good question. What is a counter-trafficking program manager with IOM Timor-Leste doing at an ASEAN meeting? Does it make sense? Is Timor-Leste part of ASEAN? like to run things more as a training than a lecture, more interactive. So Timor-Leste is obviously not part of ASEAN. Does anybody know where Timor-Leste is? So we could put it on a map. Has anybody been to Timor-Leste? Where? 1, 2, 3, 4. Congratulations, that's the most I've ever actually seen in an international setting. When I tell people back home where I work, the usual response is what? Where? And I would say that actually in the ASEAN region, whether I'm in Singapore or Indonesia, that is the same reaction. They don't know where it is. So, why is this relevant? Timor-Leste is vying to get into ASEAN. Geographically, it is part of the region, and it fits all the criteria for joining, and we'll discuss that a little bit further. So, some background on East Timor. It's the newest country, interchangeably you can say East Timor because that's English, Timor-Leste is Portuguese. You can call it whatever you want. It's the newest country in the region. Just from 2003 it became fully independent. It has a very troubled history starting back before 1974, but 1974 the Portuguese Empire collapsed. East Timor had an internal conflict between political parties for about a month, and then one of them, who was beaten very badly, decided to request assistance from the Indonesians, citing communism of the Fretelian Party, and the Indonesians obliged. The country was under occupation as Indonesia's 13th province, I think was the number, for around 24 years. And then it re-attained independence in 1999 after a referendum. The UN then administered the country for almost 4 years before the country went independent. Now in 1999, for background on the country's situation, when the Indonesian military and civil servants pulled out, militias which had been trained and equipped burned the country to the ground. And I'm not exaggerating when I say burn the country to the ground. I mean they literally burned the country to the ground. Every single state apparatus, government building, power lines, light bulbs were destroyed, burned, shot, exploded, bridges blown up, etc., etc. They left nothing, really. So when I went for the first time in 2005, I thought, wow, this place is a disaster, and buildings were already reconstructed. So I can only imagine what it was like in 1999. This led to a completely lost generation. There were no schools for quite a while. And on top of that, they introduced Portuguese as the language of instruction, even though the teachers couldn't speak it. I'd gone to school speaking Indonesian for 24 years. So as I mentioned, under UN administration for 4 years, and then it had subsequent UN peacekeeping missions all the way through until 2012. And I was there to see off my colleagues who left in 2012, finally. Now we see all the UN cars that were driving around, painted over with white paint over the UN symbols, and the government's driving them. Right now, the country suffers definitely from post-conflict societal and individual trauma. You see it in society, people's reactions to the situation, how society reacts to the situation. They define themselves by struggle and opposition. It's really challenging running meetings with civil society organizations and sometimes government officials because they need to oppose something. So even if they agree with you, you can have a good confrontation. Our first trafficking working group meeting in Dili was more of a shouting match by 2 of my CSO colleagues and the Prime Minister's office, who was just on the receiving end, and IOM was trying to moderate. At the end of it, we nearly decided to kick them out, but we kept them in and everybody was happy thereafter. So, Portuguese and Tatum are the national languages. Indonesian and English are working languages. I can tell you on the street, I speak mainly Bahasa Indonesia when it comes to numbers. When I go to buy things like coffee in the supermarkets, it's all Bahasa Indonesia. And when I work with government officials, it's all in Tatum. I speak Portuguese as well, but nobody in government except for the senior ministers do. It's only around 1.1 million people, and the population is very, very, very young. The average woman in Timor-Leste a few years ago was expected to have around 7 children in her life. 7 kids on average. That means that some were having 14 and some were having none. But right now, 20% of the population is between 15 and 30. 42% of the population is under 15. That means that a total of 62% of the population is under the age of 30. Now, that by anyone's definition is not just a youth bulge, because it's not even a bulge, it's a youth pyramid. And it's a conflict predictor in the future, barring economic uncertainties. They use the US dollar, and they are highly reliant on imports for everything. Timor does not produce anything except for coffee, and that is the only thing that's exported. It amounts to somewhere between $10 to $30 million a year, which is nothing. Right now, there's an untapped tourist potential in the country. They've been actively courting ASEAN members, in particular Singapore and Malaysia, trying to get them in. But the tourism facilities are very, very limited. The flights are expensive, and they're not very timely. And the infrastructure in the country is pretty much disastrous, although it's been improving dramatically. They focus on limited numbers and high-quality tourists. Where are we now? I've gone too far in my own presentation. Now, Timor-Leste is, as I said, on the outside of ASEAN, as everyone knows, but it's looking in. It's demonstrated considerable stability since 2006. Everybody thinks that everything's been stable, but in 2012 there was some stuff. I have friends who had their cars smashed during the election, post-election violence. It was minor though, and the country has demonstrated considerable stability. Economically, it's growing so fast it's nearly impossible to keep up with, but that is highly segmented and benefits a very small portion of the population, and that, to my understanding, is not too different than many other nations in the ASEAN region. It is actually a global example for natural resource management. It has established a sovereign wealth fund for its oil revenues based on the Norwegian model, and it draws on that every year to fund its state budget. Unfortunately, they are really going nuts when it comes to infrastructure development for a variety of reasons, and they are dipping into that fund more than is sustainable, and their oil reserves will run out, estimated by 2025. So right now, they are launched in mega projects, like serious mega projects for a country that small. They're looking at building a giant new airport. They are going to build a deep water port, including road and storage facilities. They will build a supply base and highway in the south of the country, even though there's nothing there. In Waipusi, an enclave in Nusa Tenggara Timur, they are building a special economic zone, which is basically a kingdom in the middle of nowhere, who will service someone at some point, I guess. And they are still in a row with Australia over the Greater Sunrise gas fields, which will fund their future. They're taking their time with that because there's considerable legal issues at play, and they're trying to invalidate the initial treaty that they signed with Australia. So, the country is definitely underdeveloped. One of the main areas is human capital and skills. Many government counterparts lack the most basic education and problem-solving skills, and it can be extremely frustrating working in the country, I can tell you after 6 years there. And formal statistics about the country's level of development don't tell the full story. First off, gathering any kind of statistical data in Timor is a disaster because of logistics and inability to actually do it on the ground. So any statistics you see coming out of Timor, view with a grain of salt. Wealth distribution, very, very skewed, and many people are not actually part of the formal economy and would not be counted anyway. Some people do not use cash in their daily lives and live so far away from civilization, as it were, that they still use barter systems. I would also note that up to 10% of the population actually live on government money. They are buying a peace, as it were, paying veterans from the 24-year occupation struggle to keep peaceful. So they're getting paid upwards of $700, $800 a month to not cause problems for the government. Unemployment is visibly and very, very inaccurately low based on what the stats say, and education levels are increasing. US dollars used, and with high import costs, the cost of living in Timor is in the UN system. They use a post-salary adjustment to match the cost of living in a location. In Timor, we use the same, actually above what they use in New York City, to give you an idea of how much things cost. I won't tell you how much I pay for my house that I rent because I'm embarrassed. So East Timor is very, very active internationally. They are leading, in theory anyway, the G7 post-conflict states group. And they are also current chair of the Community of Portuguese Language Countries, and they are very active. They're even having a conference right now. They have one apparently every month, it seems, and I'm actually going to be supporting another one in September on trafficking in persons. And they have consistently expressed their desire to join ASEAN over the years, and they have engaged in a diplomatic dance to try and do so. Successive governments continue their overtures and action. The most recent quote was from 2 days ago from current Prime Minister, Rui Maria de Araujo, Timor's unwavering resolve to be a member of the ASEAN family. So in Timor's eyes, this is going to happen. They signed on to the ASEAN Regional Forum in 2005 and Treaty of Amity and Cooperation in 2007. So they're going through all the steps. As of now, I think they've established embassies in all ASEAN countries, which is one of the prerequisites, and they have just received the accreditation, or given accreditation to the ambassador of Brunei, who has a fancy new office in the only mall in the country. And some members of ASEAN are not too keen on admitting Timor-Leste quickly. They're nervous about the economic systems and capacity to contribute. But there is strong support voiced by key ASEAN members. And I would have to say that anything that I'm saying here represents my personal opinion unless I express otherwise. So IOM has no opinion on whether Timor-Leste should be part of ASEAN or not. That is not our job. So looking at the potential contribution to the AEC system, however it eventually develops into, right now there is the potential for highly skilled labor in Timor-Leste as a migration possibility. They need it. US dollar economy makes it attractive in the region. There are a lot of people from the Philippines going over there to earn money. There's actually an unofficial structure to most businesses in Timor. You have Timorese as the employees on the ground, then you have either a Filipino or Indonesian manager, maybe Singaporean, and then on top of that you have an international. But without much private sector investment in Timor, the opportunities are quite limited. I can list on my hands the number of international smaller, medium enterprises that have set up there. Medical facilities from Singapore, for example, have set up. But the opportunities for skilled professionals to go and actually work there are very, very limited unless they're exceptionally intrepid and want to start their own business. When it comes to outgoing, I would guesstimate that there would be approximately 10 people in the country qualified to be sent abroad as highly skilled experts. In fact, in all the fields that are listed in the AEC, that is where Timor-Leste is desperate for people to come in and perform those jobs, including myself as an advisor in the Ministry of Justice, for example. They need doctors, they need everybody on this list. The only exception is maybe nurses, which they seem to have plenty of, but I doubt they have proper training to be sent abroad. And I would also question the national education system, whether it would pass any kind of international muster as a, what would you call it, as an accredited institution. A lot of Timorese got degrees in Indonesia, and when I say got degrees in Indonesia, I mean bought degrees in Indonesia rather than going to school. That's something that would have to be looked at if they're going to participate. So, okay, I only have maybe 3 minutes. Okay. So then I will skip quickly into the trafficking in persons part since that's my actual job. There are huge mobility risks for East Timor when it comes to low-skilled labor. They lack education, they lack worldliness, and there is extreme vulnerability to being tricked. Phishing scams online, fake advertisements of wonderful jobs with huge salaries and free accommodation. And there is an increase in national trafficking trends. So 3 examples I'll go through quickly of risks in the ASEAN region. Right now we have seen a case in the past few years of a fake Indonesian company recruiting people in East Timor. They recruited locals to do the recruitment for them, and the locals actually thought it was for a legitimate job. Meanwhile, the people were sent into some part of Indonesia and disappeared. Only people that got to Kupang and smelled something being funny got back to East Timor. Those people have since been prosecuted in Timor. IOM has also established the existence of a possible trafficking route. It's almost 100% certain that it's going from East Timor into Indonesia and then on to Kalimantan and other parts of Indonesia where exploitation is taking place. We will be doing a study with IOM Indonesia shortly on that, hopefully. I think I might end with this one instead of talking about my own projects, but I thought this was particularly interesting. A few months ago, I saw a wonderful news story from the Timorese ambassador in Malaysia, claiming that East Timor was ready to send 50,000 maids to Malaysia. This was in light of the apparent reduction or refusal of Indonesia to send any more domestic helpers to Malaysia in light of various rights and treatment concerns. East Timor apparently would be ready to fill that gap. Of course, Digging into it further, IOM, as the leading migration organization, went straight to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to voice concern and offer support. And it turns out this was actually just the ambassador who had been speaking to a private company and got the idea that East Timor could do this. So I mentioned the population was 1.1 million. Only 250,000 of those would be women of approximate working age. So do the math, 50,000 women, you're going to send 1 in every 5 women overseas. You mentioned childcare implications. What do you think would happen to Timorese society if they sent 1/5 of their women overseas? When we went to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the response from the functionary who spoke to director level, who shall remain nameless, we did not fight for independence to send our women to Malaysia to become servants. But this is an issue of concern. I'm sure some Timorese would willingly run over and they wouldn't question it. And there are extreme risks of exploitation involved in here. That same firm that was speaking to the ambassador actually been in Timor a few years earlier, trying to drum up support. Now, we're implementing 2 projects at the moment, counter-trafficking projects. I've been training police officers in victim identification and interviewing techniques, and we will be working with civil society on victim support services, etc. And IOM is ready and extremely well placed with our national counterparts to support any move toward integration with ASEAN. I would mention we're also well placed regionally to support that. And I believe we actually have a project in Jakarta doing exactly that. But that's about it for today. Sorry that I went over time. I didn't do it on purpose. Thank you for not hitting me. You threatened that earlier. But thank you very much for your time. And peace.